Never be limited by other people's limited imaginations. Mae Jemison, NASA astronaut. Welcome back to It's Time for Science. For our first episode of 2024, we continue our conversation on equity in science education. Our guests are Meagan Sternberg, a K-12 Science Instructional Coach in Oregon, and Channon Jackson, a Program Director at the Alameda County Office of Education. We end the episode with a few words from Deanna B. Vélez, author of this month's Insight article, Access and Equity, Changing How We View and Support All Students. There's a link to this most excellent article in the description. Let's dive right into this vitally important subject with Meagan Sternberg. Well, it's time for science, and it's time to talk about equity in science education with Meagan Sternberg. Meagan is a K-12 Science Instructional Coach from the North Clackamas School District in Milwaukie, Oregon, and she is here to talk about this vitally important subject with us. So, Meagan, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And I would like to talk a little bit about your background. So how did you get to where you're at? Where is your background and what is it you do now?
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a teacher. My mom was my middle school science teacher. So I think it was in my blood and in my experience to become an educator. I went to school in Tucson, Arizona and studied ecology and evolutionary biology with minors in math and anthropology and thought I was maybe going to become the next Jane Goodall, but decided to just stick with my my original passion of education. So I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I did my graduate work at Portland State University, where I student taught in the North Clackamas School District, and later got hired as a middle school science teacher at Sunrise Middle School. And I did that for 14 years, and we grew a suburban school of 550 7th and 8th graders to a school of 1,200 7th and 8th graders. Wow. And so we split into two schools. And so I spent my last 2 years in the classroom at Happy Valley Middle School, teaching 8th grade science and engineering. And then I got hired as the first science instructional coach in our district to help us implement some new standards for the state of Oregon and get some consistency across our sort of mid-sized district. So I've been doing that for the last 12 years and 1 quarter, I guess. Wow. I'm in my 13th year as an instructional coach.
Wow. So you've been in the trenches in the schools and now helping people in the trenches in the schools. I love that. So
correct.
So our topic today is about equity in science education. So how does your work support equity and access and inclusion in science?
Well, our first step when I was hired as a coach was, again, getting some consistency across the district. We had 4 middle schools and 3 high schools and 16 elementary schools that had not had any focus on science forever. Well, so since I had been in the district in the mid-90s. And so part of my job was to help create curriculum for elementary because we didn't have an adoption. So I did a lot of just developing of lessons and going in and teaching lessons for teachers and helping teachers feel more comfortable with science. And then for middle school, it was to get some similarities across the district. So we had at like one school, the rigor maybe was more or less, or the topics were different. So really starting to look at the system at the district level in terms of what kids had access to, so that if we said a kid took 7th grade science in North Clackamas, we knew that they were learning similar things at a similar level of rigor with similar types of instruction and access to materials. So that was my initial focus. And then I took a little turn for 4 years and focused actually on instruction and equity for the district. We had a cadre system. So I had less focus on science and more focus specifically on racial equity and access for our students of color in our district that was becoming more and more diverse, linguistically, culturally, racially. And then I got put back into science and ran an adoption. And so that's really been my focus for the last 6 or 7 years, has been going through the adoption process to find good quality, consistent materials across the district. So again, kids had at least consistent access to high quality science teaching. And in that adoption process, the real big shift that we made was we detracked high school science. So we had a system where kids were tracked as early as freshman year, but most often sophomore year into high-level advanced tracks, and definitely tracks that were considered less rigorous. Literally teachers talking about, this is the class for non-science kids. So did a lot of work around detracking and getting a common course sequence for high school to cover the next generation science standards. So that's kind of where we're at. And now we're getting ready to go through an adoption again. So
it never ends. That's the problem.
It never ends. It's a cycle.
It would seem very interesting as I'm learning more about the concept of equity that actually you shifted over to equity in the sense of people of color and minorities. It would seem that Venn diagram, though, is pretty overlapping. It was did that time help you with your science inclusion, sort of broaden the scope of it?
Yeah, 100%. After my first 2 years as a science instructional coach and shifting into a role that was more equity focused across content, I realized there was a lot I didn't know. I had to do a lot of my own personal learning, a lot of learning around how equity, especially racial equity, shows up in classrooms. So it definitely helped me kind of zoom in without having to worry and stress so much about the science system, to really think about what does it mean to create a sense of belonging in the classroom for kids that aren't of the dominant culture, to really affirm who the kids are that walk in our doors, regardless of their linguistic background or class background or cultural background. And then really, how do we help teachers see those kids as having assets and being able to reach the expectations that we expect maybe from our kids of the dominant culture. And so doing a lot of work around exploring our own biases, looking at our curriculum to see if it really was inclusive of different types of students as opposed to just the white dominant Western type of science that we tend to see in textbooks.
So in general, why is this an important focus for you? Why is leveling the playing field for science, especially making sure kids have access, why in general? Why is that important?
Well, I think just deep down on a really simple level, because that's what's right, right? Like that is what is fair and right and good and ethical, that we don't sort kids, that we don't expect good things and rigorous things from a few students, but not all students. From a science perspective, just like pretty much everywhere else in this country, we have a discrepancy between our students who are accessing our advanced science courses, and we wanted to definitely close that discrepancy or eliminate that discrepancy. Just like every other state in this country, we have fewer people of color that are in our STEM fields. So really giving that access to students for these high-paying, good jobs that are out there. So yeah, I think those are the two big reasons. And then just from a systems reason, it feels pretty icky when you look across and you see one school has brand new, beautiful science equipment and another school doesn't even have thermometers. Right. So that for me was one of the first things that we did, was inventorying even just what do you physically have? Because if you're at a school that doesn't even have good science equipment, how do you see yourself as being valuable or able to access science learning?
What aspects of your equity work do you think are the most effective? What works the best with teachers?
Well, for the last few years, the big shift that we've made, so we're a mid-sized district. Like I said, we've got 4 middle schools, and now we actually have 4 high schools. We've got about 17,000 students, 17 elementary buildings. And it is impossible for me as the one science coach to be everywhere and to get to everyone. So we've really shifted to a teacher leader model. So I have a teacher leader for each course, 6th grade through 11th grade from each school. So I meet with those teacher leaders regularly, and we discuss what is our adopted curriculum, how does that fit into our curriculum guides, how are we teaching those units in ways that are accessible and meaningful and relevant and rigorous for each student. And being able to meet with those teacher leaders, I have direct access or indirect access to every teacher in middle and high school, but then they are able to then be empowered to go back to their schools and support their PLCs in how they're teaching each of those units. And I feel like that has done more good in terms of creating the consistency across our district, the collaboration across our district, teachers reaching out to each other for support around different ways to help kids and support kids be able to learn science. So that teacher leadership model has been, in the last few years, I think the best work that we've done around equity and inclusion.
Our understanding is that in your district, in K through 5, you have ELD teachers that co-teach science with the regular classroom teachers. Could you share with us a little bit details of that and how effective that is? Because a lot of elementary teachers are maybe intimidated by science or don't have a science background, so they're not sure how to approach it. So how does that work in your district?
Yeah, so when we went through the adoption process 6 years ago, we adopted FOSS, Next Generation, for grades 1 through 5. We have a slightly different model at kindergarten that's called Language for All, but we had these FOSS modules and we did PD and we have a whole kit rotation system and we get teachers what they need, and they were teaching these units and, doing, I think, the best job that they could with the small amount of support we were able to provide. And then about 4 years ago, we shifted our English language development program to be a push-in as opposed to a pull-out program. So our ELD specialists do push in and co-teach with the classroom teacher. So we're still in kind of the new phases of that. So there are definitely some bumps in the road. In terms of our philosophy, that totally matches our philosophy in our district, that we shouldn't be excluding kids. We shouldn't be not having them have access to science because they are also learning English as a second language. So that part, I think, is super duper important. One of the best things that's come out of it from my perspective as the science coach is that by law, every kid now has to have science almost every day, every week. So because kids have to have their ELD minutes, teachers have to teach science either 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week or 45 minutes a day for 4 days a week. And so that means kids are getting access to more science than they ever have before, more consistently across the district. Whereas a teacher by themselves might have just been like, I don't feel like teaching this unit, or, oh, I don't have time, or I don't feel confident with this content. So it's kind of forced us in some ways to really make sure that kids are getting science a lot of the time. And then we switch between science and social studies. They also do their social studies content in a co-taught model.
We had a conversation with Claudio Vargas about ELD, and it really illuminated it for me in the sense of kids are very excited about science. And so they're sort of forced to use language to explain themselves in a way that's not like, follow these rules and now you have to learn this dialogue in the way we traditionally teach language. So it seems to me like science would be an amazing way to bring English language development into the classroom.
Yeah, exactly. And even from day one, before we had a co-teaching model or push-in model, that was my messaging to my elementary teachers. We adopted this curriculum specifically because it is grounded in kids having a common hands-on science experience for which we can attach language. So we don't front-load vocabulary. We have an experience and we attach the word to the thing that they're doing, either the physical thing or the intellectual thing. So that academic language development through science, which is so intrinsically interesting and accessible in so many ways, I think really does support that language development. So one of the things, especially when the pandemic hit, we really focused in on oral discourse. So really producing language, getting kids to produce and practice language through accountable talk structures, through small group discussion, through whole group sense making, which is built into the FOSS curriculum. And that has been, I think, the sort of foundation of our language development in science. And now we're sort of doing the next level of like, okay, now how are we incorporating reading and how are we incorporating writing as well as language consumption and language production within the context of science.
If somebody comes to you and says, we really need this in our district, in our state, what do you advise educators, leaders, other stakeholders to center equity in their systems? What kind of steps can they take, and who should they be talking to?
Well, I guess from the first steps that we took, it was really just inventorying whether we had any equity or equality at the moment, which we didn't. So figuring out where you have those gaps. And so for us, it was definitely a gap in curriculum. So how is that at least one step towards creating more access to high-level science learning? Definitely working cross departments. At the time when this was happening, our ELD department was in a separate department as teaching and learning. So we had to definitely work across departments to make sure that we understood how do our science goals match with or connect with or support our English language development goals. So I think that that collaboration across departments, across schools is really important as well. And then, I think teachers know it's important. They know that this is the right thing to do and that we should give kids all access, but then they really just also need the strategies and the skills. So we've been focusing the last year and a half on collaborative learning, which is super important in science and in language development. So really looking at where are those specific instructional practices that might need to be improved or increased to then allow for that access to happen for students in the classroom.
And to wrap up, this is fascinating stuff. I love this conversation, but what are your general aspirations? What are your aspirations for the field for the next 5-10 years? What do you want to see happen?
Well, I want to get through this next science adoption and really just continue with my messaging with teachers, which has been, this is all just about continuous improvement. So how can we just get a little bit better at creating more access for students? How can we get a little bit better for making science seem relevant and interesting to kids? How can we get a little bit better in having kids see themselves as scientists and maybe explore science as a career? So for me, there's no real end goal, even though retirement is definitely in sight. There's really no end to this. This is just about how do we continue to get better? And that is different every single year because the kids that walk into our classrooms are different every single year. And so what they need and how we approach helping them learn science and love science will be different every year as well.
Meagan Sternberg, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
It's time for science, and it's time to continue talking about equity in science education. And with me is Channon Jackson, Program Director at the Alameda County Office of Education. So thank you for being here, Channon. And I'd like to start off by introducing yourself and tell me what it is that you do.
Hello, thank you for having me. So, yes, I am a Program Director at the Alameda County Office of Ed. I have been the Science Program Director now for a couple of years. Prior to that, I was a Program Manager. Basically, what I do is I get to support all our school districts with their science programs. I spend a lot of time designing professional development to support our teachers and helping our school districts think through their systems and the programs they're running for their teachers.
We've been talking to leaders in the field about this with a series of questions about equity in science, an incredibly important subject. So we want to start off with, how does your work support equity, access, and inclusion in science?
Well, like I said, I spend a lot of time designing programs, and a lot of our programs are dedicated to our schools and our school districts that have a lot of Black and Brown students in them and are also a very diverse school district. So when you think about a school district, right, you can have all different types of students and all different types of schools at those districts. And what we are finding is that because of the different requirements of different schools and the different needs of different schools, that starts to bring on issues for some of our schools, especially when it comes to teaching things like science. What we tend to see is that a lot of our schools and our school districts who support students that may be coming from low income communities tend to focus a lot of their efforts on ELA, which is our English language development and instruction, and math. And partially that's because that's what gets showcased. When you look at our California State dashboard, the tests that they promote are those tests. So because those tests are forward facing for our schools, they tend to put a lot of pressure on their districts and their teachers to make sure that our students are scoring what they would like to see on scored on those tests. What ends up happening is because those subjects become more emphasized, they also get pushed in with more hours in the day, especially in our elementary schools. So where we used to give every subject kind of an equal amount of time to teach, we start to see that our schools are dedicating hours and hours and a half to teaching ELA, more than an hour dedicated to teaching math. And when you're an elementary school teacher and you're in charge of teaching all these subjects, but you don't have the time to see them, we start to see this pattern of really science and social studies being the ones that are kind of pushed aside. And we notice that that tends to happen at our school sites and our that have students that are um, like more of our black and brown school students, right? So those students, they tend to emphasize those subjects more. Where at other sites and other schools, they get to like kind of spread the wealth.
We in our previous episode we talked to Claudio Vargas, and we were talking about the concept of how important science is that actually helps learn English and English language acquisition and all that kind of thing, and why people don't understand that. I mean, do you feel that science is the kind of thing that they should be emphasizing because it requires students to sort of like, because they're excited about it, learning how to communicate both in their own language and in English? Do you feel that that's something that's important?
Yes, I feel like that's really important. I was once told a long time ago, and I've been holding on to this, and I use this basically at every PD that I gave, that someone told me once that there are only two subjects in school, and those subjects are science and social studies. And all the other content areas we teach are tools in which you need to understand in order to understand science and social studies. So for us, we really emphasize that if we have students that aren't doing well in reading and we want to get them engaged, science is super engaging, right? We're doing all these hands-on activities, and that is a way to get students more engaged in the reading. And what I really promote, especially in our elementary schools, is thinking more about integrating our subjects together. We can teach our comprehension skills, and we can teach reading strategies as we're reading about science, right? We can have our students, our ELA students, practice language as they're talking about science. And the real big shift when we talk academically about students and especially language is that what we're really trying to get all of our students to do is to use academic language, because that's the language that we want them to pick up on at school. And we know that the majority of students are not using academic language in their everyday life. I'm not using academic language in my everyday life. So I want to make sure that I'm tying this practice of language to something that is academic. And science is a great place to do that. There's a lot of vocabulary words. You can pull out studying like root words. A lot of our science vocabulary is actually tied to a lot of Latin and Greek roots, and we can talk about those things in those spaces. We need to be able to have students practice their reading skills as they're researching the things that they're learning about in class. So yeah, I will always agree with Claudio on that.
The more I do this, the more I realize, I mean, just how engaging science is to kids. I mean, I grew up as an artist, but I think that art and science very much go hand in hand. But also, of course, like you said, math and English, it just seems like such a no-brainer that it's the kind of thing that we should really be working towards. And I wanted to know what are your aspirations in this field? What would you like to accomplish?
Well, I mean, one thing I would love to accomplish is that every student has the opportunity to participate in science, right? We want to get more people in the STEM field, and you don't know what you don't know. So if I'm not necessarily given that opportunity in school, I won't think that I like that thing. I think
Mm,
also just kids come in with that curiosity. So my dream would be that we hold on to that curiosity, we hold on to that sense of wonder throughout their whole career. I think when we look at people who are like the entrepreneurs in the world and these people who are super successful, it's because they had a curiosity, they had a sense of wonder, they had this space of people supporting the way that they were innovative. And I feel like science is a great place to do that. I think if we're thinking like right now, short term, one of my real goals is to make sure that in our elementary schools that we are thinking about science integration and that teachers have the materials and the skills to do so. Because what I really find is that we have really, of course, we have really awesome teachers, and sometimes they are terrified to teach science and they're terrified
yeah.
to bring those skills that they are already really amazing at into that space. So my little
Mm.
short-term goal is to get our teachers comfortable with themselves so that they feel comfortable teaching science, and also get support our school districts in making sure that they're letting teachers know that science is important and there's space to teach science.
I think it's great that the Alameda County office has you there for that. I mean, it's probably a lot of districts don't have somebody who's focused on this. So if there are teachers out there who maybe don't have that, the advantage of someone like you, advocating for them, what do you think is needed to provide better and more equitable science and teaching? Is it that kind of a thing where we should be pushing districts to find more program directors and outreach, or how do teachers find that?
I think one, a lot of teachers are really resourceful, right? So I think just get started is the first thing I would say. A lot of times it's like, well, we don't have this person, or we don't have this specific curriculum, or we don't have, but then they are like, but there's this really cool thing I saw online,
Hmm.
right? So it's like, just get started, just start doing it. I think to advocate, there is a ton of research out that talks about science integration and talks about the engagement in science and how it helps us with reading and how it helps us with writing and how it helps us build up math skills. So I think that a lot of our um, admin and our district folks are really into data. So the more you can find data, and that's, just a simple Google search you can do to find great data about why this is successful if you're trying to push for more time in your school. And also, I feel like if when we're really skilled at teaching things like ELA, we should be able to talk about how we can use our science textbook to help our students understand informative text, right?
Hmm.
And if what we really try to push out is like a 5E learning model. So if we know that it's important to start having students be engaged in something and start with some sort of exploration, then I can push for saying, like, and I'm going to teach these reading skills through the science textbook, but I'm going to start by having them do this hands on investigation so that they can
Hmm.
start have some questions that then will actually make them more engaged in the reading, right? So just knowing little tidbits like that.
That's great, because that's sort of the final question was basically how would you advise educators or leaders or stakeholders to center equity in their systems? But those are great ideas already. There's so much out there online for students, for teachers to looking at, a lot of cooperative, a lot of groups that are very supportive of each other, it seems.
Yeah, and there are tons of just resources in science, right? We are in a space where we have the Exploratorium and we have the Academy of Science and we have the Lawrence Hall of Science. And all of those spaces actually have people that specialize in science education. All of those people have other connections to different groups that are also specializing in those works. So a lot of times we think of those places as like places we're going to go on field trips, but they're also offering really awesome professional developments for teachers and for coaches, and even for us. I go there a lot of times to learn more about science and professional development. So those are also great resources for teachers to lean into. I know that a lot of those places do like little what do they call them? I don't remember what it's called at the Explorer term, but they have like little pockets of like science activities. Like if you only have this much time in your classroom, here is a
Mm.
great activity you can do. So leaning into them for resources. And then also, if I could talk to like principals who are interested in things like this, really finding that teacher that's really into science and just start lifting them with the rest of the class, because a lot of
Mm.
times, because this has become so ingrained in some teachers that like we only focus on ELA and we only focus on math, they technically are like, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to start. But if you have that person who's really into it, usually their energy and their engagement in it can brush off on other teachers. So lifting them up, allowing them to like do some science activities with teachers at professional developments, allowing teachers to go in and see how are they managing their classrooms during science is really powerful. We're all about promoting teacher leadership and really looking for those people who are already in it and have already tried things, and providing them the space to kind of share the wealth with others.
I think a common theme that we keep coming back to is teachers are just, I think they're intimidated by science, but all the science people were like, no, come on in, it's fun, So it's like, just jump in is what we keep coming back to. So that's awesome. Well, Channon, this has been fantastic, very, very informative. I'd thank you for your time and about this important subject.
Thank you. This has been great.
Hello, my name is Deanna Vélez. I'm a curriculum developer for the FOSS project at the Lawrence Hall of Science in Berkeley, California. I also provide professional learning experiences for teachers and administrators in the area of science, literacy, and language development. So today I wanted to share that School Specialty is republishing an article that I wrote a few years ago around equity. And at that time, I had been looking into the research around asset-based approaches to teaching and how an educator's mindset has a huge impact on student learning. And during this research, I came across a report published by the Learning Policy Institute titled Closing the Opportunity Gap: How Positive Outlier Districts in California Are Pursuing Equitable Access to Deeper Learning. And I was really moved by this report that looked at 7 districts in California that were outperforming districts with similar demographics to these districts. And there's a list of commonalities that you can see in this report, but one of them that really struck me was this: they all had a vision for that was shared by the whole community that prioritizes equity. In other words, that learning for every single child. And I love this quote from the superintendent in one of these districts, who said, "Every student, every day, whatever it takes." And that's the mission for this district. And they really not only walk the walk, not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. So I wrote this article for educators in mind to provide a different perspective for how we assess what students know and can do. And instead of focusing on what they can't do, let's think about what they can do. And just that subtle shift in mindset can improve the learning environment for everyone. So I hope you'll give the article a look, and I'd be happy to receive any comments or questions you might have about it.
It's Time for Science is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lippman and Tom Racine, and is sponsored by School Specialty and FOSS, the full option science system, at the Lawrence Hall of Science, UC Berkeley. Be sure to check out FOSS over on Facebook and Twitter.